So first, I will give a short introduction. I will introduce our panelists here in the room and online. We are having a hybrid session, as I already mentioned. One of the hybrid presenters is still missing, but let's hope that he appears there and finds the correct link. This session is organized so that after a brief introduction and a round of introductions, we will have short presentations by the panelists, and then we'll move on to the panel discussion. One of the presentations is going to be in Spanish, so there is a sheet, a rough translation into English of this presentation, and we'll also have subtitled video of it in Spanish, so if you have some knowledge, it will be relatively easy to follow. But let's start. This session focuses on innovative methods for multilingual education that overcome or have the aim of overcoming exclusion, which is created through the selection of a small number of languages used in education. And to create sustainable multilingual societies through incorporating decolonial ideas of language. Inclusive and democratic societies can only function if their members can communicate successfully and feel valued. Creating inclusive societies thriving in and sustaining diversity is thus one of the greatest and most complicated tasks facing the world today. Education system based on a selection of languages and on teaching languages in standard languages only systematically exclude many members of society from access to education and civic participation. This holds in particular for postcolonial societies in which the former colonial languages still occupy the monopoly, but applies also to societies in the global north, as here in Finland, in which internal diversity in local and indigenous languages and languages of migration is not reflected in the educational language policies or language policies in general. Attempts at incorporating multilingual policies across the globe so far have been focused on selecting additional languages per region, locality, or school. These approaches do not always result in truly inclusive multilingual practices, since they fail to do justice to the full linguistic and cultural complexity of these spaces. In addition, they face complex problems of implementation and lacking social, linguistic, and economic resources. The questions we will be asking in this panel are the following. How can sustainable multilingual societies be supported through inclusive educational programs? What alternatives to multilingual programs based on the selection of a small number of languages exist? And what are the challenges in integrating translanguaging or languaging programs and methods into standard language-based education? And finally, which approaches originating in the global south can be transferred to multilingual societies in the global north? And I'm very happy to present our panelists here today. We have Caroline Juirat from Paris. We have Jules Mansaly, who is now visiting here at the University of Helsinki. We have Friederike Lüpke from the University of Helsinki, and Guido Barrios from Fundación Eeva Marais in Paraguay, as well as Maria Mercedes Arzadón from the Philippines. And now I would like to invite you all to give a brief introduction of who you are, a presentation of who you are, what is your connection to these issues we are discussing here, and where do you work? So Caroline, would you like to start?
Well, so, I'm a professor of linguistics in Paris. I've made some social linguistic research in Senegal for a long time, since 1985, mostly in southern Casamance, which is the most multilingual part of the country, and in the region of Dakar, where Wolof is the dominant language. And there, into microphone, so everyone wants to
and just to the people here, we have now, I think, we have 22 participants online.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
yes.
a lot of people.
Yes,
You
a
can
lot of
see them.
people.
So I am Caroline Juirat, professor of sociolinguistics in Université Paris-Cité, former Paris Descartes. And I made sociolinguistic research in urban spaces, especially since 1985, mostly in southern Casamance, the more multilingual part of the country, and of Senegal, and in the region of Dakar, where Wolof is the dominant language, along with other languages, of course. And there I have analyzed many multilingual interactions characterized by translanguaging. So that's why I'm here, and mostly because I have investigated in schools. I think that's it for the moment.
That's good, thank you. And Jules, please.
So my name is Jules Mansaly. I'm Senegambian, Senegalese, but now I'm working at the University of the Gambia as a senior lecturer of sociolinguistics. And yes, I teach at the University of the Gambia. I am a writer and a cultural activist, and as such, I'm the founder of the Casamance Book Center. This is the center aim is to promote literacy and book access to young and vulnerable students in the southern Senegal. Yes, currently I am visiting researcher at the University of Helsinki on multilingualism and multilingual education as part of the Africa Early Career Mobility Program. So I'll be talking about, yes, teaching strategies in multilingual classrooms in Senegal, and also our project, Casamance Book Center in Senegal. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Friederike Lüpke. I'm professor of African Studies here at the University of Helsinki. And my main research interest over the past decade or so has been multilingualism as a social practice. And I've also become interested in inclusive multilingual education. And as a result of a research project that I led for 5 years on small-scale multilingualism in a rural area in Senegal, intensely and hopefully inclusively multilingual education system was born, Liliema. And today I will talk briefly about this program, not so much about the practicalities, but about the potential and also the challenges of implementing such a repertoire-based literacy program.
Thank you. And I think next door we could have Maria.
Hello, it's around 8:00 p.m. So good evening from the Philippines. I'm an associate professor at the College of Education, University of the Philippines. I teach sociocultural foundations of education, history of education, and alternative learning. I've done studies on mother tongue-based multilingual education. I also participated in crafting language and education policies, help facilitate teachers training, materials development, and advocacy. So I'm happy to be here and be interacting with other MLE scholars from other places. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, Guido Barrios has not been able to join us via Zoom yet, but we'll hear his presentation in a short while, and I can perhaps briefly introduce him. He's an educator and a linguist working at the Fundación Ivimarae at Asunción in Paraguay, working with the promotion of Guarani and other indigenous languages in the education system. And he also works as a supervisor of one local school district, mostly focusing on primary education. And next on, we could actually listen to his presentation. And as I mentioned there, could you also share the transcript on the chat? Okay, well, there are subtitles in Spanish. the English version later on. I will share you
You can share it in the chat if you have it.
it's the one that I sent you. Yeah. Well, let's listen to it. It's in Spanish, so you will probably be able to follow it anyways.
Hola, hola, un saludo cordial desde Paraguay. Soy el profesor Guido Barrios, integrante de la Fundación Humanae y director académico del Instituto Técnico Superior de Estudios Culturales y Lingüísticos Humanae. El tema que voy a abordar es el multilingüismo y su abordaje en el sistema educativo paraguayo. Pero antes que nada, antes de empezar a desarrollar el tema, quisiera compartir con ustedes algunos datos de Paraguay. Paraguay es un país sudamericano ubicado en el centro mismo de América del Sur, rodeado por Argentina, Brasil y Bolivia. También Paraguay es el único país en el mundo, una población no indígena que habla una lengua indígena. Aproximadamente un 98% de la población total de Paraguay es una población no indígena y apenas el 2% está constituido por una población indígena. Entonces, vamos a estar desarrollando el multilingüismo y su abordaje en el sistema educativo paraguayo. Según la legislación, la Constitución del Paraguay en 1992, en su artículo 140, establece que es un país pluricultural y bilingüe. Sus idiomas oficiales son el castellano y el guaraní. La ley establecerá las modalidades de utilización de cada uno de estos idiomas. Las lenguas indígenas, así como las de otras minorías, forman parte del patrimonio cultural de la nación. Anteriormente, en la Constitución de 1967, se declaró el guaraní como idioma nacional, pero no como idioma oficial. En el artículo 77, más concretamente, sobre la enseñanza de la lengua materna indica: la enseñanza en los comienzos del proceso escolar se realizará en la lengua oficial materna del educando. Se instruirá asimismo en el conocimiento y en el empleo de ambos idiomas oficiales de la República. En el caso de las minorías étnicas cuya lengua materna no sea el guaraní, se podrá elegir uno de los dos idiomas oficiales. El Ministerio de Educación y Ciencia fue una de las primeras instancias en aplicar ambos artículos, la 140 y la 77 de la Constitución paraguaya de 1994. El Ministerio de Educación y Ciencia implementa la educación bilingüe. En cuanto a las lenguas diferentes al español y guaraní de las distintas minorías, cuando cuenta con una lengua materna diferente, punto de discusión inicial actualmente está resuelto. Los derechos lingüísticos de estos pueblos tienen el amparo en el marco al ser alfabetizados en su lengua materna, incluida la lengua de señas, reconocida como lengua materna a partir del año 2020. Posteriormente, con la base de la Ley 4251 y de 2010, 2011, 2012 respectivamente, se crean dos instancias que son encargadas de la gestión de las lenguas en el Paraguay. Paraguay Ñenguera Sanjá, Secretaría de Política Lingüística, Guaraní Ñe Guapabe, Academia de la Lengua Guaraní. En Paraguay se dan dos situaciones lingüísticas. Si bien se caracteriza por la supervivencia y uso generalizado del guaraní, existe una rica diversidad lingüística que muchas veces es invisible y minorizada. Por ejemplo, las lenguas indígenas, la lengua de señas, la lengua extranjera. Por tanto, la política lingüística nacional es de estatus nacional diferenciado. Dos lenguas oficiales mayoritarias y amplitud de lenguas minoritarias. Se debe mantener en cuenta que los pueblos indígenas son minorías en el Paraguay, solamente el 2% de la población total paraguaya. Desde un punto de vista histórico, una característica diferenciadora de la construcción de la nación paraguaya está relacionada con la preponderancia de la población mestiza que utilizó ambas lenguas desde los primeros años de la conquista española. Se preservó la existencia de ambos idiomas, el guaraní a través de la madre, el español a través del padre. En cuanto a las lenguas indígenas, existen 5 familias lingüísticas. Una de ellas es el guaraní, que integra a su vez a 6 variantes, siendo la variante 7 la oficial y el resto hablada por los pueblos indígenas que aglutinan a 19 pueblos indígenas, así como se puede percibir en la presentación. En cuanto a otras legislaciones sobre lengua, se debe señalar la siguiente. Según la Ley 5031 de 2013, que implementa el idioma inglés en la malla curricular de la educación pública desde el preescolar hasta el tercer curso de la media, o sea que hasta la culminación del bachillerato. La Ley 5362-2014, que aprueba el Tratado de Marrakech para facilitar el acceso a las obras publicadas para las personas ciegas, con discapacidad visual y con otras dificultades para acceder al texto impreso. Por ejemplo, la Ley 6354 de 2019, que garantiza el acceso a la comunicación e información de las personas sordas y con discapacidad auditiva para realizar trámites en los organismos del Estado. La Ley 6530 del año 2020, que otorga el reconocimiento oficial a la lengua de señas paraguaya. En cuanto al funcionamiento de la Secretaría de Política Lingüística, específicamente con el Ministerio de Educación y Ciencia, con los demás organismos del Estado en virtud de un decreto presidencial, se trabaja con unidades de asunto lingüístico que se han creado con las diferentes instancias que dependen del Poder Ejecutivo, y se trabaja en distintos ámbitos, por ejemplo en el ámbito educativo, en el ámbito judicial, comercial, administrativo, político, etc. El ámbito del uso de ambas lenguas es múltiple, sigue estando más presente en la oralidad, pero cada vez más, gracias al compromiso de todas las instancias, la lengua vive y genera un proceso de transformación cultural que se dirige hacia el bilingüismo real y completo. En materia de educación están previstos en la Ley de Lengua diversos aspectos. En el artículo 26 de la alfabetización de la lengua materna, en el artículo 27 de la participación de la comunidad educativa, en el artículo 28 de la enseñanza de las lenguas oficiales y en el artículo 29 de las lenguas oficiales como instrumento didáctico. En el artículo 30 de la formación del profesorado, más específicamente en cuanto a la gestión de las lenguas, los retos y trabajo de la Secretaría de Política Lingüística, que se dirige primero el bilingüismo oficial, normalización del empleo de la lengua guaraní como idioma oficial del Estado, volver habitual el guaraní en el trabajo con la institución del Estado, saliendo más del entorno familiar y comunitario. Además, al señalar que desde 1994 esto se da en el sector educativo. 2. Lenguas indígenas, fortalecimiento de las 19 lenguas indígenas para su preservación, teniendo en cuenta que hay 6 lenguas en serio peligro de extinción. Y como 3, lengua de señas paraguaya, la estandarización, normalización y su empleo y regulación en el servicio de la interpretación. En cuanto al Diseño Internacional de las Lenguas, que se inició en el año 2022 y se extiende hasta el año 2032, proyectada en la Ley de Base de la Resolución 74-396 de la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas del 18 de diciembre de 2019. Más específicamente, en cuanto a la educación lingüística, los desafíos que Paraguay asumió son los siguientes. En cuanto a la atención sin negociación ni renuncia de las 2 lenguas oficiales, paraguayos mínimamente bilingües. Atención de las lenguas indígenas en la comunidad de hablante y difusión de la sociedad no indígena. Atención de la lengua de señas desde la primera infancia hasta la educación superior. Atención de las lenguas extranjeras según una escala de prioridades. Atención de condiciones lingüísticas heterogéneas en el aula, tratamiento de diversidad lingüística en educación superior. En cuanto a la propuesta curricular, es multilingüe en Paraguay y se basa en el castellano, guaraní e inglés como lengua extranjera. Existen 3 modelos de trabajo en el sector de educación relativo a las lenguas. En función del uso de estas son el modelo A, grupos de alumnos donde el guaraní es la lengua materna, el castellano es la segunda lengua. Modelo B, grupos de alumnos donde el castellano es la lengua materna, el guaraní es la segunda lengua. Y un modelo C, tanto el castellano como el guaraní son predominantes. Las experiencias curriculares se han regido por lo establecido en el currículo nacional y el Plan Nacional de Estudios, en los grados de educación inicial hasta la media. Específicamente en educación inicial cuenta con una experiencia exitosa, por ejemplo, la aplicación de un test de competencia lingüística donde se pudo determinar cuántos niños y niñas tienen como lengua materna una u otra lengua. Sirvió como línea de base para desarrollar las actividades pedagógicas, tanto en la escritura como en la oralidad. En el preescolar se utiliza más la oralidad y el primer grado la parte de la escritura. En cuanto al inglés, específicamente el Ministerio de Educación y Ciencia establece su impartición en la Ley 5031 del 2013, que implementa el idioma inglés en la malla curricular desde la educación preescolar hasta el tercer curso de la media. Desde el Ministerio de Educación y Ciencia se diseñó una propuesta de formación docente del servicio. El inglés tuvo 3 propósitos: contar con un cuadro profesional competente en la enseñanza del inglés, optimizar desde el criterio de la eficiencia la capacidad profesional de los docentes paraguayos en ejercicio, implementar el mandato enunciado a la Ley 5031, que implementa el idioma inglés en la malla curricular de la educación pública, desde el preescolar hasta el tercer curso de la media. En este sentido, dando respuesta a esta propuesta, se han desarrollado las siguientes acciones. En el 2017 y 2018 se han formado 600 docentes mediante el curso de habilitación lingüística y pedagógica para la enseñanza del inglés como lengua extranjera en el primero y segundo ciclo de la educación escolar básica. 534 instituciones de gestión oficial en los 17 departamentos del territorio nacional, incluyendo la capital del país, con un total de 84.741 estudiantes beneficiados. Se estima que unos 560 docentes son de aula de los 596 formados, mediante el curso de habilitación lingüístico-pedagógico para la enseñanza del inglés como lengua extranjera en el primero y segundo curso de la educación escolar básica. La experiencia a destacar es la estrategia Leo, Pienso y Aprendo. Para la estrategia Leo, Pienso y Aprendo se realizan capacitaciones potenciando las herramientas metodológicas de esta propuesta, que tiene el objetivo principal de formar niños y niñas lectores comprensivos, críticos y escritores competentes, atendiendo especial importancia a la lengua materna del educando en el primer ciclo de la educación escolar básica. Los resultados de esta estrategia en el mediano plazo conllevan, además del éxito de los niños, una profunda satisfacción de los docentes por los resultados que obtienen sus educandos. En cuanto al programa de capacitación para educadores para el mejoramiento del aprendizaje para niños y niñas, jóvenes y adultos, los recursos tradicionales y tecnológicos para trabajar el multilingüismo se cuentan con recursos didácticos como planificación de clases castellano, guaraní, alojado en la plataforma virtual Tu Escuela en Casa. Asimismo, se han entregado 600.000 materiales impresos, en el marco del programa de mejoramiento de las condiciones de aprendizaje. Se ha trabajado también en la modalidad de educación a distancia. En cuanto a la lengua y educación de la primera infancia indígena, experiencias y desafíos. Así como dijimos que Paraguay cuenta con 19 pueblos indígenas presentes en 13 departamentos del país, incluyendo también la capital, tiene además 711 comunidades indígenas y aldeas a nivel país. Desde el nivel inicial, escolar básica, juntados datos finales del año 2020 en cuanto a las escuelas indígenas. En Paraguay, 10 para las comunidades indígenas. La escolarización temprana es una experiencia nueva. Esta experiencia se sustenta en el programa educativo Primera Infancia de Expansión, la atención educativa oportuna para el desarrollo integral de niños desde la gestación hasta los 5 años a nivel nacional, alcance ampliado. Con base a este programa se ha realizado la selección de 52 instituciones y que se han trabajado en la metodología para la mejora de los aprendizajes. De esta manera, entonces, estamos cerrando esta presentación. Muchísimas gracias por la atención. Aguilla.
Okay, thank you. We are still waiting for Guido to enter, but perhaps as a summary of what we just heard, we could see the local diversity, the use of several languages in parallel and in mixed modes as well. On the national level, having the official languages of Guarani and Spanish that also give certain legislative and educational models for other situations of linguistic diversity. And then we have the influence and the presence of the global language English, which is also present in the national Paraguayan legislation, at least. So at the same time, this bilingualism of the nation, where we have the strong presence of the official language Guarani and Spanish, Guarani is at the same time a model, but also a threat for the other indigenous languages. Okay, and next on, we will hear the presentation by Maria Mercedes Arzadón, and we will be sharing your presentation from here, right?
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so my talk is entitled Possibilities for Sustainable Mother Tongue-Based Multilingual Education in the Philippines. Next slide, please. Can you please show the slide presentation? Right. Okay, next slide, please.
Yep, there we are.
The Philippines is a middle-income country with a population of 100 million and 15 to 20% of which are indigenous people. We were colonized for more than 400 years, and we gained our independence only after World War II. We are among the most linguistically diverse country with 182 living languages. Next slide. Next slide, please. Here is a timeline of our before that, please.
This one.
Here, okay, right. Here is the timeline of our language and education policies. English was the only official medium of instruction when the American colonial government set up the public school system in 1900. Any Filipino pupil was prohibited from speaking his language even while playing on the playground. In 1925, a research group from Columbia University came to evaluate the educational system and found that Filipino children were underperforming by at least 2 grade levels. The scholars pointed out to the English-only policy, untrained teachers, and inappropriate learning resources as the leading causes of low performance. In 1943, the national language Tagalog, which was later called Filipino, began to be taught in schools. After World War II, nationalist school officials introduced the use of vernacular or regional languages for grades 1 and 2. The vernacular language education ended in 1973 when martial law was declared by President Ferdinand Marcos. And English and Tagalog became the only languages used in schools. Filipino or Tagalog was used only for few subjects like social studies and values education, and everything else was taught in English. After the end of martial law, experiments were undertaken involving the use of small L1 as a bridge to English. In 2009, influenced by the Education for All movement, in the intention to improve learning outcomes, the Philippine government issued policies to implement in the whole country the mother tongue-based multilingual education, or MLE. Next slide, please. One major driver of our language policy is the recognition of indigenous rights. The law states that indigenous people have the right to establish and control their educational system by providing education in their language. Our law identified the indigenous people as a homogeneous group who resisted political, social, and cultural inroads of colonization and became historically differentiated from the majority of Filipinos. The multilingual education policies issued in 2009 provides that from kindergarten to grade 3, the mother tongue, or L1, is the medium of instruction in all learning areas. There shall be a subject called mother tongue where children learn literacy skills. Filipino and English are to be introduced gradually and become the sole medium of instruction in secondary and higher education. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yep. The Ministry of Education issued various orders to support MLE, the integrated language curriculum for mother tongue, Filipino and English, provision for materials development, language mapping, teachers training, etc. New teacher applicants should demonstrate their capacity to use the local language in instruction. Lately, teachers' initiative for multilingual education are recognized and become a basis for promotion. Next slide, please. Next slide. A local language qualifies to be a medium of instruction once it meets the 4 minima, like a working orthography, a guide for spelling and grammar, a dictionary or word list, a set of readers, and the availability of a teacher who knows the language. 19 major languages were initially chosen as official medium of instruction in 2013. Later, Filipino Sign Language and 43 indigenous languages were developed. Next slide. We thought that the idea of valorizing small languages by providing them with resources like orthography would provide a happy ending to our educational woes. Unfortunately, we found later that there are broader social and institutional structures that we have to contend with. 12 years later, the new president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., and his allies in the Congress moved to end multilingual education or mother tongue-based multilingual education and revert to the old system favoring English. These proposals are now being discussed at Congress. Next slide. Here are the usual objections raised against multilingual education. Many families feel that their mother tongue should be used only at home. Schools should use their time and resources for English. It seems hard to accept that L1 proficiency transfers to L2. It must be noted that the Philippine economy relies on its service sector, and the Philippines heavily depends on its English-speaking migrant workers. There are also concerns about the low scores of Filipino children in international tests like PISA and TIMSS, which use English as the language of assessment. In other words, MLE can only be acceptable if it improves English proficiency. Regarding implementation, there are concerns regarding choosing the regional language as the medium of instruction in linguistically diverse schools. Sometimes the regional language is not prestigious or highly favored. I realized that the framework used in our system emanates from the bilingual education model of the West, where additional languages like Spanish, French, Russian, and Mandarin are prestigious and have many resources. In our case, our local languages are not of the same status. Furthermore, Filipino children are naturally multilingual, unlike in the West, where most children are monolingual and learn languages sequentially. These conditions require us educators to study how multilingual education can be sustainable and responsive to our unique context. And so let me share the result of my recent study. Next slide, please. The need to develop mother tongue materials is central in multilingual education program. It must be noted that the Ministry of Education directed schools in the whole Philippines to produce their own materials in local languages, especially readers or storybooks. This material should be original, reflecting local realities. In my fieldwork, I noticed how teachers and community people have become enthusiastic about creating enlarged storybooks. Thus, for my dissertation, I did an ethnographic research on the making of mother tongue big books in an indigenous community in northern Philippines. My study utilized the theoretical form of policy enactment by Ball, Braun, and McGuire. Instead of a managerialist view of policy implementation, ethnographers view policy from all sides, especially from the bottom. In this framework, policies are enacted by social actors like the teachers as they interpret and translate the policy through complex and creative ways. I found in my studies how the teachers in a small school district called Bugyas work together to create mother tongue books. In a span of 8 years, they produced 300 storybooks in their mother tongue called Kankanae, some in Filipino and English. There were 20 writers, teachers, and school heads, and 6 illustrators from the community who were involved in the process. Next slide. Data showed that MLE, or multilingual education, signified a shift in pedagogy from a code-based literacy instruction using drills and chalk and talk, using unfamiliar language like English and Filipino, to literacy instruction that involves the use of colorful storybooks in a familiar language. And stories and illustration were made by people they knew in the community. There was a high level of reading engagement and richer class interaction. Next slide, please. Among the 63 storybooks I analyzed, I found several common themes about everyday life in the village. The storybooks name and describe people in the village, plants, fruits, animals, insect, places, events, and food that are unique in the place. Next slide. As I research site and other places, I discovered some unsettling stories about discrimination and bullying experienced by indigenous children. It also included subtle messages about the destruction of the environment due to deforestation and heavy use of chemicals in the vegetable farm. The reference to environment in mother tongue storybooks is quite significant. As one advocate and lawmaker said, you cannot protect what you cannot name. Next slide. My study reveals that the creation of mother tongue storybooks as part of the multilingual education program provided an opportunity to address the impoverished view of literacy and local languages. Learning to read and write can be made meaningful through local stories and communicative activities. In the long process of writing stories and creating big books, teachers who wrote stories and created storybooks in their mother tongue realized how English defined their identity as students and teachers. It reminded them of their childhood when they were criticized or bullied for their language or accent. They also remembered how they had to be silent in classes because they were fined. They had to pay a fine, a language fine, if they spoke their language. I also found that using the L1 or the mother tongue is not just about using the languages a child speaks to learn to read, but it is also about building on the repertoire of meanings associated with these languages, identity and environment that enable the child to read the word and the world in which he lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for this very interesting presentation. And after the presentations, the introductory presentations, we'll of course have time to discuss and also to ask some questions. But let's continue now with Caroline's presentation.
Hello. It is from a sociolinguistic point of view that I will share now some of the findings of our research in Senegalese schools. Starting from 2002, 2004 and onwards, I made some research in that field with a colleague, one of my colleagues from Dakar, Martin Dreyfus. And we decided to investigate in elementary schools as we wanted to know if there were manifestations of the local multilingualism in the school and in the classrooms, even though in Senegal, the official teaching language is French. Because there was a real need to document what was going on there in the school and in the classroom. So my first point will be, were there spaces and types of activities and interactions favoring multilingual use in relation to the surrounding area? We made observations mostly in informal schools, which were supported by an NGO in Tiers-Monde in the suburbs of Dakar. There, the formal system was absent, was not present. These schools were in houses hired by unemployed people of the neighborhood who wish to teach and give occupations to the children of their area. So a community of people all linked to the local environment shared a common teaching project and worked together very closely and heartily. They used from time to time the usual French wall of mixture to teach, even clumsily, especially during what they called activities of a new kind. For example, outdoor activities or debates between pupils on the subjects of their choice, parallel to the discussion meetings of adults held in the area. So there, in a less normative context than in the formal educational system, even though these teachers were globally deprived of formation, of didactic resources, and institutional help of any kind, even though they were unable to valorize explicitly their multilingual competences and uses in the classrooms and still wanted an official recognition from the state, or at least the Minister of Education, we observed a kind of institutionalization of the communicational habits that existed in the area. And we found that very interesting. The teachers said they wanted the children to be rooted in the environment, and at the same time, they would express the need of their better life through the knowledge of French. All the children of the Dakar region, are exposed to the variations of the bilingual mode in their everyday life and to a kind of local French in contact, which is of course not the standard target of the formal teaching. Now I come to my second point relative to the profiles of the teachers we met. I would like to stress the diversity of their trajectories, mobilities, language repertories, training, or absence of it. There is also a need to document this diversity, to better understand their behavior and attitudes at school or out of school. For example, in the same teaching place, we have been in touch with teachers with very different profiles. Some might have completed their secondary education or not. Others might have been trained in a formal system, training center or by NGOs or missionary centers, while others might have been in contact with French teachers or begun their teaching careers after having done many other things, etc. These differences have had an impact on how they consider language use in and outside the classroom, of course. Most of those we met in that place did not seem to care much about language variation. Of course, all of them displayed the use of different registers, and translanguaging was just one of them. In such contexts, children are exposed to this variation, and most teachers did not seem to be aware of its effects on language acquisition and use by the children. In Senegal, there is unfortunately a lack of debate of linguists and didacticians on these matters. So translanguaging was not explicitly valorized. Some said that they used the language of harmonization for the little ones if they did not share the same language when they enter school. It would of course be well off in the Dakar region. There is necessarily some translanguaging in the harmonization process and the transfer to French. But I don't have the proof of it because I haven't seen that or listened to that really. Otherwise, many teachers rationalized the use of another language than French, if not translanguaging, saying that it is a tool or some help for a better understanding, and that is all. My third point, I would like to stress the specificity of some talk methods in youth in the classrooms between the teacher standing in a high position, and the pupils. Talk methods that are very relevant in the Senegalese context of schooling. Low-skilled teachers tended to use routines, repetition, rote learning. But we found out that a more specific interactional pattern was shared, even by proficient ones, as it seemed to fund the relationship between the teacher and the pupil in the classroom. It is a sequential form characterized by a series of contiguous pairs, such as questions and answers which may be partially provided by the teacher and ended by the teacher and the pupil together in a kind of chorus. This would be either in French or in the so-called first language of the pupils in bilingual forms. There is also a pattern on a ternary mode, question or initiation, then answer, then evaluation or feedback. Linked to these patterns, very irregular ones, teachers used a very specific intonational pattern going up and down, imitated by the pupils. These patterns are very frequent we noted that they were very frequent in the formal as well as the informal settings, and in the bilingual classes as well, where the teacher teaches in the so-called first language of the pupil. This teaching habit could be an imitation of former colonial ways of teaching French and talk habits inherited from Quranic schools, but that has not been yet decided, really. These patterns may not be as relevant when some translanguaging is involved in the teaching process or in the relation between the teacher and its pupils. Translanguaging is, of course, less predictable, much less predictable, and is related to many other kinds of relational experiences between people than the ones just described and that we have been in touch with in the schools, in the classrooms. In conclusion, I would like to say that there is in Senegal and in many other countries, especially African ones, I mean from the Francophone area at least, a great need of qualitative studies and documentation about these questions, going along with a new awareness of all the factors implied in the teaching process in multilingual environments. And I just presented some of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next on, we'll have Jules Mansaly giving his presentation.
Thank you so much. In 2017, I went to the Gambia as a visiting lecturer at the university to teach semantics and social linguistics. The first impression I had at that time was the society is very multilingual, because for me, from Casamance is the most multilingual setting in Senegal. It is in the southern Senegal. So for me, yes, it was only in Casamance, but not in the Gambia. So when I go outside, I realized I could speak Balanta language, Mandinka language, Wolof language, and even Creole, Portuguese-based Creole. It was very impressive. Now, in 2019, I had the chance to supervise two master's theses. The one was of the student who investigated language use among teachers, like students in the Gambia College. So Gambia College is the school where they train teachers. Now, how language, what kind of strategies they use outside classrooms during the break. And the second one now worked on a language used like language used during the teaching process. So still by the teachers now in the in-service practice. This is a very interesting. So, wow. So from this observation is not only the students in the classrooms are very multilingual, but teachers also, they are already multilingual, but they use their multilingual repertoire to teach. And they used to say, if you are not multilingual, you don't know the word. If you know only you are monolingual, that is abnormal. And then what is very interesting now, in 2020, I had the position at the University of the Gambia. So the Gambia is very particular because the students you have in your classroom are almost all teachers. What happens is from the Gambian college, they send them to teach. And for many years, they got a scholarship from the government and then have study leave to come to teach, to learn, to have something like a bachelor degree and so on. So most of the time, my students are teachers. And at the French department, teaching French, and also at the English department, those who teach English or other subjects in English. And from our interaction, since I supervised these two master theses, and our interaction was about what kind of interaction, what kind of strategies do you use when you teach? It's always the same, multilingualism with many, many languages, depending on, yes, the teacher itself, if the teacher, how many languages the teacher knows, and also the students. But most of the time, and we have the record where it is really clearly stated that they are very multilingual and classrooms are very multilingual. But in the Gambia, the fact is English is the official language, the language of instruction. So in the curriculum, you have English has the language of instruction. But what you have actually in, yes, practically is multilingualism. So we have grassroots here to do something with that. And now the Gambian government realized that something is happening wrong. They wanted to implement local languages in the educational system. Why? Because they think that they know that the student level is decreasing. So to help them to increase the studying level, you have to introduce local languages. And that's why we have this collaboration with Friederike, Lüpke, and even the Gambian College. They wanted to have a kind of partnership. She's going to talk about Liliema. They want us to help them to equip the teachers, because if you wanted to teach in a multilingual classroom, or if they want now to officially have the bilingual or multilingual education system, you have to teach or to equip the teachers, and then now to give them some learning materials. And then we have this collaboration called with the Gambian government and also the Gambian College. And because this is a very important, as my colleague said right now, the mechanism is the same in Senegal and also in the Gambia, the use of local languages when teaching. And that's why I think that it was very important to do something, because otherwise it may not change the conditions of these people. So in Samin, what happens is I built a language center, that is a Brook Center, which purpose is to provide books to young people, because what I realized that, as I said, I'm a writer, so sometimes to time I go to talk to them about literature and so on and so, and then when I leave some books there, they are not accessible to students. When I go back the second year, the following year, they told me, we didn't see the books. And I say, what is wrong? So we have to create a space where they can have access to these basic tools. So that was the project, that is to create a library. And then this is not enough. We have to equip them, not only them, but also to create a kind of literacy project. And that's why we wanted to collaborate with Liliama in order to decrease poverty. And yes, there are many school dropouts in the area. And the linguistic accessibility is very important because they use French in the same case in the Gambia where they use English, but the problem is still there. The level of instruction is decreasing very, And for this, to provide quality education, gender equalities, reducing inequalities, and sustainable communities and cities, based for sure on the Liliema model, which is a program created by Friederike. I'm not going to talk too much, and teaching and learning program designed for multilingual settings. Thank you so much.
Okay, my turn now, and I will jump right in and share this screen. So, here we are. So we have heard already that multilingualism, and in particular this fluid translanguaging practices, are really widespread in West Africa, whereas the schools in the formal sector are still based on a model based on the selection of languages, the official languages of colonial provenance, or a limited number of local languages and so-called mother tongue-based bilingual education. And these models are really different from each other in the general epistemological underpinning, in the language idea that underlies them. And the question that I am here raising is whether we can actually find a way of creating a space for literacy that is open to the fluid translanguaging that is always emerging, dependent on the repertoires, on the relationships, on mobility, with these other language ideas. So squaring the language in circles, so to speak. And why are we talking about this topic at all in a conference on sustainability, where most people talk about climate breakdown and huge ecological challenges? Well, in order to actually be a participant in society, you need to have access to information, access to knowledge. And here, a language is really a crucial issue of exclusion in many post-colonial contexts in the global south. For instance, in Africa, where 80% of children are educated in languages, the colonial languages that they don't speak outside the classroom and that are not taught as a subject. And where mother tongue-based bilingual education or multilingual education is introduced to remedy this, several problems similar to those that also were evoked by Chad. This is still based on a selection of languages per area, very often one language per area, and always excludes many, many, many learners. So it's not their mother tongue that is taught. So my question then is, how can we break with colonial ideas of language and make education truly inclusive and multilingual, to include everybody? And how can we come up with these flexible multilingual models that are needed to adapt to the fluid and dynamic character of multilingual repertoires? And as I said, as part of a collaborative research project, we have come up with an idea for such a program. It's called Liliema, language independent literacy for inclusive education in multilingual areas, or as our former president, who unfortunately passed away, called it l'alphabet sans frontières, the alphabet without border. And we have implemented this in the informal sector, for adult participants in Senegambia's most multilingual region, the Casamance. And the idea is really, it's one alphabet, the alphabet that is more or less the official alphabet of Senegal, that has characters that are shared by most modern alphabets for all languages of Senegal and beyond. And we teach literacy with this alphabet, but not based on a particular language, but based on the entire repertoire. So in a way, like a transcription system, but we don't use the IPA, we use this official alphabet. It has some phonetic characters, which have been introduced by the linguists who devised these orthographies, and they are very tricky to write, for instance, on mobile phones. So we always teach alternatives. And in the context of Senegal, there is not only spoken multilingualism, there's also written multilingualism and written variation in different orthographies. And we also introduce this in the classroom. So we also talk about French spelling of names, for instance, etc. So this means this, because it's based on this model, that Lilema in principle can work in all contexts where modern Latin-based orthography has been created for a group of languages. Yeah, very often in post-colonial societies in the 60s, there were these language committees that codified orthographies for all national languages in a territory. Or it's like you can use the Finnish alphabet to also write Puukieli, dialects, or to write Karelian, for instance. Yeah, it's the same principle. So it has actually the potential to be used in many other contexts, which is what we're experimenting with now. Here's an example of worksheets for the first level with participants who have some basic knowledge of literacy in the Latin script, but no experience in writing the repertoires. And here you can see we're introducing particular letters, and we have names and syllables. And this is a little bit more advanced, this worksheet, where participants can name these vegetables. And these examples are from several languages. So the courses are created by local teachers with knowledge of the local language ecologies, who are also inhabitants of these ecologies. And so they select then languages for the examples that they know are in the repertoires of the participants. But the participants can use their entire repertoires in order to write vegetables in any language they wish. And that means also in one language if they wish. It doesn't have to be multilingual. This means Lilema is really different from the normal mother tongue-based bilingual education, which generally focuses on big languages. So languages that are regional, lingua franca in an area, for instance. Here we are talking in Casamance often about really small village-based languages with very low speaker numbers that can be included in such a literacy space because it is open to every language. And I will skip this video that shows you a little, or do I have time? Yeah, I think I have time. Okay, good. So I show you this little video that shows learning and teaching context, and also how a teacher and learners negotiate together, because no teacher here is the master of all repertoire. So it also creates a different relationship. Everybody is a co-learner. And you will see the named languages as identified by an observer in the video.
Mamba jatombe Sippola
Après adik na kasa.
So here in this video on the blackboard, I show you what was on the blackboard, many languages that are part of the repertoires, but here you've seen actually the teacher instructing a participant to write come and eat in a language that is not in either the teachers nor the learners' repertoire, but that is part of this particular classroom. So it's also about sharing repertoires and becoming aware and respect linguistic diversities in all its facets. Then we used this method for Lilema COVID information campaign. Normally written information campaigns are not very successful in these areas because French is the only language of literacy for most students. But we knew that we had several thousand literate learners because we had run literacy classes for 2 years in several villages. And when COVID hit, we decided that we wanted to mobilize these learners. And so we created, with local teams, we created COVID information posters. They were all multilingual. And we had 6 different multilingual mixes to correspond to 6 different language ecologies. They always had French, the official language, always Wolof, the largest national language, Diolaphonie, the regional lingua franca, and then several locally confined languages. And what we found was actually that we did a quantitative and qualitative survey to assess the impact of this campaign. And we actually found that the information was really understood, that it increased the knowledge on COVID, which was really only diffused in French, in writing, and occasionally in some local languages on the radio. And that also, and that was really remarkable, multilingual people want to access information multilingually. So all participants scanned the posters and wanted to access the information in several languages, and the comprehension was, resulted from putting together, bits and pieces of the repertoire. And what was really important was the local languages were really important because they created trustworthiness. Yeah, these were local people, relatives, kin, who could be trusted. And several other languages were used for complementing and verifying the information. So our experiences with Lilema so far tell us that Lilema works really well in contexts where we have teachers with good knowledge of the local language ecology, where we have sufficient training, and where we have customized materials, and where we have adults who attend on a voluntary basis. I think this should not be underestimated. Challenges that we have encountered or that we anticipate is one that we are facing now is transferring Lilema to other language ecologies, which means that the materials need to be customized and adapted by local teachers who also need to be trained. And then our next challenge would be to see if we can transfer Lilema into formal educational contexts where teachers and students do not participate by choice, and where very often very different language ideas dominate, and there is a much stronger monolingual habitus. And that's what I'm happy to discuss in the remainder of the session. But I wanted to end by stressing the potential that we believe Lilema has in order to contribute to the sustainable development goals in the domain of quality of education, gender equality, because, in the patrilineal societies, linguistic identity and language choice always based on male identities. So women are more mobile for marriage. They're always excluded. So their repertoires are not reflected in mother tongue-based bilingual education very often. Reduced inequalities, especially for minorities, small languages and their speakers. And the creation of sustainable cities and communities where everybody can participate without barriers. And we believe that this also is relevant for the global North, not only for global South society, but also for the global North societies that are diversifying really rapidly with more than 150 languages spoken now in Helsinki. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Friederike, and all the panelists. And now we have some time for discussion. I would first like to offer some observations based on all these presentations. Gracias a todos los participantes. Quisiera primeramente agradecer las ideas que han presentado aquí. y ofrecer algunos comentarios generales. What I can see in all the presentations is the importance of local knowledge and creating together. On the other hand, we had perspectives from research that highlight the need for qualitative studies and understanding what is actually happening in practice. And on the other hand, these ideas of how the reality somehow filters through the official systems of education and so on. And this is, of course, the basic idea of how we can incorporate multilingual practices into education systems and by making them thus sustainable. And actually, because we don't have that much time, I would like to start with this with a very practical question about what are the actual concrete steps that educators and linguists should take for a more inclusive, multilingual and sustainable education. And I'm going to say the same in Spanish. Entonces tengo esta pregunta basándome en las presentaciones. ¿Cuáles son los pasos que deberíamos tomar los lingüistas y los educadores para realmente poder crear un sistema educativo que es tanto inclusivo, multilingüe como sostenible? Todos los comentarios son bienvenidos. I would like to invite you all to comment on this question. Some ideas were already presented, but maybe you want to explore them in further detail. And Maria and Guido, if you want to say something, please just raise your hand and we'll then give you the turn. Entonces, Guido, si quieres comentar esta pregunta, es solo levantar la mano y te damos el turno. I can see Maria already has her hand raised there. Go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, that's a good question, on how we can sustain long-term inclusive multilingual education. I think based on my experience, it's important to look at our history. Sometimes there's a tendency to want immediate results. You want PISA results to increase, and people become, to earn more income, etc. But it takes time. It takes time to implement transformative projects like multilingual education. And so if we think long term, like something beyond our lifetime, then I think we can proceed more carefully and make the right decision, informed decision, and not just be moved by advocacy or our passion, but make sure that decisions that we make are sustained by enough training, enough materials, and enough research.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I would have one. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, please, the mic.
Yes. No? Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
I was thinking that, for example, in Senegal, which is the country I know best, there could be and there would be some reactions of the teachers if they are, meant to teach in other languages than the one they have. The linguists, they are so keen about their working or on their own language. That's the main one for me. It's one of the main problems, because even multilingual speakers, the Walloon people, for example, they are happy to promote their own language. That's the main obstacle for me. So we have to create that's why Liliema is so interesting, because they are working together on a project that involves everybody on the same level, because they are not good writers of any kind, so they, but if, you have to choose between this language or that language, that creates rivalries, and even the multilingual repertoire of the people is not valorized, and because for the moment there is no valorization of multilingual repertoires. They would say it's not a language, and so on.
I agree. And I also think what is really also important is the attitudes to the focal languages of education. And as long as there is a monolingual and standard-based ideology, that means you have to be a speaker with a certain accent and have a certain kind of proficiency, then of course that language has all the prestige, but it also means then it's a penalty to be multilingual, because you have to do the extra work always. The multilinguals always have to do the extra work, and it is not really valorized because nobody cares about the multilingualism. And the other thing is that I also think that one of the biggest hurdles in formal education system is that language is formally assessed and social assessed. And so language is not only used for social selection, social mobility, but also for assessment in all subjects, right? You know, the quality of your writing, whether you make grammatical mistakes, the notion of mistake in itself, right, makes it really difficult to have a fluid multilingual repertoire. Because everybody of you, I guess, who is multilingual will realize that it's very difficult to keep up 4 or 5 different standard languages in writing, right? Because that's not how multilingualism works. But if you're then assessed on all your languages in this way, you know, who is going to do that?
Yeah, this is very interesting because when I heard Maria speaking, she said they use English they teach English by using child's mother tongue. And that is the same we have in the Gambia, in the curriculum, official curriculum, and also in Senegal. And then the problem is now, even if they say it's a multilingual education system or bilingual, but it's still multilingualism. And that is very interesting. We have to watch out not to keep the old system of monolingualism. Thank you.
Thank you. And in connection to this question, what kind of attitudinal work is then the focus? What are the actual concrete attitudinal workshops or trainings we can offer to people? So in a way to change this bias that we have towards monolingualism.
Maybe first of all, create
debates, a place where you can debate of this thing, because that's not done for the moment. For the country that I know, there is no debate about the subject. It's as if, you know, each person is on his own trajectory, you know, and they don't kind of they adjust in the oral communication. They have to, but they won't valorize that. That's the main problem.
So more discussion and dialogue.
Yes, more discussion and dialogue, and giving awareness of the, so the teacher become aware of what they are doing and what that means to be in a multilingual environment.
First Friederike and then Maria. Yes.
Finland has a very innovative curriculum for basic education. And there are 2 themes that cross the entire curriculum and should be implemented by teachers who are, however, not trained to do this. And one is multilingual awareness, and one is multilingualism as a resource. And I think, so these are very good conceptual tools already. And now I think the next step would be to actually work with teachers and find tools and methods and practices that allow them to actually do this. Because the teachers, of course, they are not social linguists, they're not applied linguists, you know, they don't know how to turn multilingualism into a resource, or how to create this awareness. What does it mean in practice? But I think these are already first signals that are very promising.
Thank you. And how do I open Maria's mic?
She can unmute herself.
Yeah, Maria, go ahead. You wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, in our case, I think storytelling, telling your story, I realized our teachers, they were conscientized. They became mindful of their unquestioned assumption, their mystification about language, identity. As they work on the stories, they also came to reflect on their own stories. So it's like experiencing intergenerational trauma, remembering how your parents suffered because of their language and identity, and it's the same with you. So I think when we become more reflective and reflexive about our experiences, we will find empowerment and, redemption. And I think it starts there, and then we can do it collectively together. And I think for colonized countries like the Philippines, that kind of healing is very vital to our liberation and empowerment.
Thank you. I would also like to continue on this idea of, in many of the presentations, we have had the colonial language present, for example, English in the case of the Philippines, or French or English in Western Africa, and Spanish in Paraguay. And it is kind of undeniable that those languages are used and needed. Y en español, en varias de las presentaciones hemos visto la importancia y la necesidad de usar la lengua colonial, como el español en Paraguay, o el inglés en Filipinas, o el francés y el inglés en África del Oeste. Pero ¿cuáles son los beneficios y los retos que presenta justamente esa presencia colonial desde el punto de vista del multilingüismo? So what are the challenges and the benefits that the use of these colonial languages present from the lens of the multilingual education? How do we prevent them from taking over, which is what is often happening nowadays? So, ¿cómo podemos prevenir que esa lengua colonial tome todo el espacio en el sistema educativo por esas razones socioeconómicas que conlleva?
For me, one of the
As the local use of this language, which is a great problem, which is not done everywhere. I mean, because there can be diglossic ways of speaking that language and recognize the variation. Well, even in France, it's a problem, but I think that African multilingual settings would be, leaders in the way for that. They could. At least I know that Francophone teachers, during the Francophone reflections about those settings, that is a point that is people deal with, because if we don't accept all the local varieties, then no future for the language.
Yeah, that is very important, because as I said, from our perspective, if you are monolingual, you don't know the world. So language is really very important. The problem maybe we have with official languages, French and English, is the standard form they impose in classrooms, which people don't use in their own, the actual situations. So yes, language are beneficial from any perspective, but yes, and that is where Lilium is a good tool model.
Would you like to comment something?
Well, maybe. This is also a discussion in Finland, right? And so very often English is now presented as the killer language. And it's always from this monolingual perspective. It has to be Finnish or English. And I think that's the wrong way to look at the issue. because we can be multilingual. So it's not one language against each other. You know, we need both and we can have both. It's again, just if we think we can only have one perfect language and that only works if we have only one, right? Then that language then kills everything else, right? Because it creates this huge linguistic insecurity.
No sé si quieres comentar algo, Guido, desde el punto de vista paraguayo en cuanto a este asunto del español y el guaraní y las demás lenguas indígenas, y yo intentaré hacer un resumen en inglés luego para el resto del público.
Para mí, muchas gracias. Para mí es clave, la experiencia paraguaya, por ejemplo, es un ejemplo, ¿verdad? Que hay que evitar ese corte generacional, ¿verdad? Nosotros desde la colonia de España, en Paraguay, esto se pudo mantener a través de las madres, la lengua guaraní, por ejemplo. Por eso, hasta hoy día, el 70% de la población paraguaya sigue hablando esta lengua. Y entonces, esta es la experiencia que nosotros tenemos y que podemos decir con certeza que hay que evitar ese corte generacional para que las lenguas pueda perdurar, para que la lengua pueda seguir dando fruto, ¿verdad? Para que podamos realmente y seguir disfrutando, ¿verdad? De las lenguas coloniales que aún existen en el mundo. Pero esto es un panorama también negro, ¿verdad? Para muchos lugares, ¿verdad? Donde se va perdiendo, porque no se habla más prácticamente. Hay, por ejemplo, población entera que va predominando una lengua que es más fuerte, por ejemplo, en nuestro caso, por ejemplo, el castellano, pero estamos trabajando así instituciones como Dumara y otras instituciones, por ejemplo, que está acá en Paraguay, está luchando en la preservación y en la revitalización de las lenguas, de donde propiciamos espacio para que se sigan hablando, para que se siga practicando, para que la gente también pueda aprender estas lenguas y de esa manera mantener.
Gracias. I'll just resume shortly. So Guido was pointing out the generational divide in Paraguay, where the younger generations are increasingly using Spanish. And he wanted to highlight the work that local activists and organizations do in order to counteract this trend. And it basically consists of making the local languages usable in the multilingual setting and in the modern society. So offering training, having presentations online and language courses online, for example, in the local languages. So a comment from them. We only have a couple of minutes left. We have a lot of questions on the chat, but unfortunately, the organizers of the event are probably kicking us out in 2 minutes. So I would like to thank everyone participating here in presence and online, and of course to our beautiful panelists for these interventions. I think we have learned a lot from different perspectives from around the globe, from South America to the Philippines and passing through Finland and West Africa from the perspective of research, and highlighting this importance of taking a kind of epistemological change on looking what language is and what education is, which is actually making the sustainable change to education. We could try to save the chat and maybe have these questions in mind if we will organize another session or try to respond by email to people that have specific questions about the project. So please write your questions in the chat. Thank you again for participating. Muchas gracias por participar. Y seguimos en contacto. We will continue cooperating towards the multilingual, sustainable, inclusive education systems.